Hi there, welcome to another edition of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, exposing the unfolding socialist communist revolution around the world. Please like the show, share the show, get the word out there. Hands up! Hands up! Today I'm going to talk about something that's plaguing many countries of the world, and that's racial unrest. We see this all over the world, from the United States and Canada, a lot of the third world countries. We see it in Nigeria, we see it in Latin America. You have different ethnic groups at each other's throats. Now, there is a scientific basis for this. It's Marxist. It comes from Joseph Stalin himself. Back in the 20s, he published a very famous book, Marxism and the National Question. For a time, Stalin was actually the nationalities commissioner of the new Bolshevik government in the Soviet Union. So what was Stalin's idea here? Because this book has been seminal, it's been used by communists all over the world, and we see its effects every single day. So Stalin's thesis was pretty simple. You know, the world is composed of nations. They are set up on the basis of language or race or culture, geographical region. Now, the goal of communism is world revolution. And the original Marxist idea was the working class would rise up and take the wealth of the capitalists. It would all be shared equally, and you'd live in a sort of communist paradise with no want and no classes. Everybody would be equal. But when the revolutionaries took Russia, most of the world didn't have an industrial working class. The industrial working class was really only Europe and the United States, and they weren't about to have a revolution. So Stalin looked elsewhere, and he looked back a little bit. He thought, well, if you want to have a revolution and you don't have classes, surely you need to use nationalities, because race and culture are very deep. They're very, class is more mobile. You can actually, in many countries, you can change your class relatively easily, but people are much more wedded to their culture, and of course they cannot change their race. So nationalities are food for revolution. So instead of in the third world countries and less developed areas where you don't have a working class, nationality would be the better way to go. So you see this play out all over the world. It all goes back to Stalin. In the Communist Party USA back in the 1920s, they actually worked to establish a black republic in the southern part of the United States. They wanted to bring Florida and Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia and the Carolinas into a southern black republic that would actually split away from the United States. Not overtly socialist, but it would be, they would use nationalism, they would use race to divide America, which would of course weaken America, and then they could work on the class consciousness of the new people, of the new republic. See, Stalin's idea was you use the race, you use the culture, you use the nationalities to split up existing countries, then you conquered them, the Communist Party would take them over, then these nationalities would be federated into a new Soviet Socialist Republic. You know, the Union Soviet Socialist Republics. It was Russian, it was Ukrainian, it was Tajik, it was Kazakh, it was Uzbek. All of these nationalities federated into a communist federation. But before that, they had used the racial differences in these nationalities to conquer the existing social orders, establish a communist government, then federate them into this new communist bloc. And that's exactly what they intended to do to America. In the United States, they worked with the black people in the South. The Communist Party poured a lot of people into the South in the 1920s and 30s to try and split the South, to try and split the country, to weaken America. In the later years, they worked on through organizations like MACHA, which believed that you could split the southern United States away, right from Colorado and Utah, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, and return them to Mexico. split them away from the United States by using the Latino populations in those states to return them to Mexico. They never would have gone back to Mexico unless, of course, Mexico was part of the Communist Federation, but it's always used to weaken the United States. The similar movements are occurring in Hawaii, Hawaiian separatism, to re-establish a separate Hawaiian republic. And of course we see it with the Native Americans. The reservations are heavily infiltrated by communists, and they're using the already separate reservations to set up an Indian nation which can challenge the United States for territory, for government authority, etc. It's all done to weaken the target country. The communists care nothing about the blacks, nothing about the Latinos, nothing about the Native Hawaiians or the Native Americans or the Eskimos. They just want to use them to break up the existing country. I saw this happen in New Zealand. I've read documents right back from the 1930s when the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was telling the Communist Party of New Zealand to agitate amongst the native Maori population for complete separation, to set up tribal areas governed along communist lines by the Maori population, to basically destroy the integrity of New Zealand. And now we have a socialist Labour government under Jacinda Ardern, and I hope you'll check out my documentary on her and her communist background. They are now setting up Maori governments. They're giving Maoris seats and special privileges in government in New Zealand, so they can basically set up their own tribal authorities, their own autonomous areas, to give the Maori population, which is about 15% of the population, ultimately about 50% of governmental control in the country. This is all national question politics. It comes from Stalin. It's nothing to do with the rights of Maori or anyone else. It's all about dividing the country and creating chaos and bringing about communism. In Australia, the Communist Party of Australia was heavily involved for many years and still is in Aboriginal land rights. This was documented by my good friend Jeff McDonald, a former Australian communist, who noticed after he left the Communist Party that all of his old communist friends were no longer working through unions. They were all working in the Aboriginal land rights movement. We see it today with the Mapuche in Chile. We see it with the Samic people in Lapland. We see everywhere you have a minority, you have communists agitating that minority. You see it all over Africa. This is how the communists took South Africa into the control of the communist-dominated ANC, for instance. You see it virtually every country where there's a minority. You'll see communists agitating to use that minority to break up the country and prepare it for socialism. Right now we see it in the Ukraine, the Donbass region of the Ukraine, the far eastern region of the Ukraine. It's got a very large ethnic Russian population. So Putin, the KGB man, who would have learned this stuff at school basically in his KGB training, has used the excuse of the ethnic Russians in the Donbass to invade the Ukraine, to liberate them. This is national question politics. It's nothing to do with the rights of the ethnic Russians in the Ukraine. It's all about using them as an excuse to take territory off the Ukraine, break that country up, and prepare it for eventual invasion by Russia. So this is a science. It's not just random ethnic minorities just getting all fired up for independence. It is a scientific program organized by the various communist parties to create trouble, to create revolution, and prepare the way for eventual communist domination. Now in the United States, this has morphed a little bit, because while the communists were working in the South, and they found it very hard going, because the South was very conservative, very Christian, but the communists adapted to that. The Alabama Communist Party, which had about 500 members in the 30s and was mainly black, used to open their Communist Party meetings with prayer, because the black population was so heavily Christian. They didn't like communist atheism, so the communists posed as Christians. We're going to have a Christian revolution here. The Soviet Union is going to come and help Alabama black Christians to free themselves from the yoke of American Yankee slavery. This is the kind of thing they will do. They look at the ethnic makeup of a country, they look at the religious makeup, they look at the cultural makeup, and they tailor the message to suit. But the goal is always to divide the target country. Another example of this happening today is the Scottish independence movement in Scotland. You know, that has deep communist roots, deep national question roots. The long-time campaign for Quebec independence in Canada, where the French Quebecois have been fighting for independence for many years from English-speaking Canada. Well, not really. It means the Canadian communists have been fighting for many years to break up Canada. We see this happening in Northern Ireland. Remember the troubles in Northern Ireland for many years, where the Catholic population of Northern Ireland, which was a minority, because most of Ireland is Catholic, but the small northern part, Northern Ireland, which remained under British rule, had a minority Catholic population and was largely Protestant. So we had the Irish Republican Army, we had the Irish National Liberation Army, all fighting British rule in the name of Irish unity, in the name of, restoring the rights of the Catholic people. You know, these were atheist, communist revolutionaries backed by Libya and the Soviet Union, fighting a religious war in Ireland to the so-called benefit of the minority Catholic population. There was no regard for the Catholics. These revolutionaries were mainly atheists. What they wanted, if you read their literature, was not a united Ireland, but a united socialist Ireland. Very, very big difference. So all of these groups had communist origins to some degree or another. But the mainstream media will never ever tell you this. These are always portrayed as legitimate independence movements, etc. They're just people seeking their self-determination. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. You could look at virtually any example around the world of an independence movement, the Polisario in the Western Sahara, the Kurds in Turkey, all of them are basically utilized or manipulated to some degree by local communist elements or foreign communist elements. In the United States, the national question had to be modified because the black population, which was really in the first 50 years of communism in America, the main target, because Latinos were a much smaller part of the population back in those days, though they have been growing rapidly in recent years. The black population started moving out of the South and moving north. This started in the late 1920s into the 30s, where people would leave Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and go and work in car factories in Detroit, or move up to Milwaukee or Chicago and form large black communities there. So they could see that there was never going to be a black revolution in the South. But all of these black populations could be used in a more sophisticated way, a more suited to modern American conditions. So what the communists did was started to infiltrate the black populations in the North and recruit as many black communists as they could, set up as many black communist unions as they could, to basically, and even infiltrated the black churches, to draw the northern black populations into the left, into the Democratic Party. In 1983, the communists elected Harold Washington as the mayor of Chicago, a black guy, and they used national question politics to do that. They got the Latinos on board, they got the Puerto Ricans on board, they got the Communist Puerto Rican Socialist Party to mobilize the Puerto Ricans. They got the Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and the League of Revolutionary Struggle to mobilize the black and Asian populations of Chicago to unite them behind this far left Democratic Party candidate. And they have continued to use this pattern all through the North, for many years. You know, we all look at Detroit as an example of an urban disaster. Well, Detroit was once a humming town, 2 million people, the richest town in North America. But then they had the communist-inspired riots in the 1960s. You had the communist-controlled unions taking over. Then they elected a communist black mayor, Coleman Young, posing as a Democrat. And Coleman Young, built on the chaos of the riots, his corruption and his communism drove businesses out of Detroit, drove a lot of the white tax-paying base out of Detroit, and Detroit turned into a slum. That is national question politics. But those Detroit black slum dwellers vote very reliably Democrat. The black slum dwellers of Washington, D.C. vote reliably Democrat. The same in Chicago, the same in Milwaukee. All of those big northern cities with large black populations, they are the base of the Democratic Party. And that has been deliberately engineered by the communist movement by electing black radical communists to city councils and county commissions and state rep seats and state senates and congressional seats, etc., to turn those areas into a sort of new plantation. This is a modern version of Stalin's national question. In recent years, the Maoists in this country, mainly the Liberation Road group, have noticed that the black population is moving back into the South. A lot of blacks are leaving, Michigan and leaving Illinois and Milwaukee, leaving Wisconsin and moving back to Georgia and Mississippi and places like this. So you're getting a big influx back into the traditional homelands in the South. So what the left are doing, what the communists are doing, is moving thousands of people, organizers, union officials, etc., into the southern states to utilize the black populations and growing Latino population in the South to elect a whole bunch of left-wing Democrats to city councils, county commissions, Congress, etc. They've already used the strategy to flip Virginia from Republican to Democrat. They're on the verge of doing that in North Carolina. They're on the verge of doing it in Georgia. They're on the verge of doing it in Arizona. And they're not too far behind in Tennessee and Florida and other southern states. So they're using the black populations, the Latino populations, the growing Asian populations of the southern area, the southern states, to basically exacerbate racial differences and then run candidates, left-wing candidates of color, like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, like Andrew Gillum in Florida, and others, to move the South to the left. Because the communists understand if they can move the South to the left, all they have to do is flip 2 or 3 more states. North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida would be a real plum for them. Texas would completely seal the deal. The Democrats, the left, will control America permanently from that point. So what I'm getting at here is, folks, that we see a lot of racial division in the world, and almost all of it is communist inspired. Yes, there's always been racial tension since the beginning of time. But as our societies have got freer and more free market, more constitutional and more peaceful, racial differences tend to subside. So the communists don't like that, so they need to bring in more socialist measures, they need to divide society, they need to bring in critical race theory, they need to to foster the grievance industry to keep those racial differences ticking, because they can be manipulated to win electoral battles. They can even be manipulated to start wars if necessary. We've seen that happen around the world on many, many occasions. In some American cities in 2020, it wasn't far off open battle in some of them. So I hope this has given you a little bit of an insight into the national question, to the Stalinist roots of modern world politics, because this is playing out all over the planet, folks. Marxists realized that class alone was not sufficient to motivate people towards revolution. You had to go deeper into the culture, into the racial, into the religious differences that drive people. And if you can tap into those, you can push almost any population into revolution or revolt if you work at it long enough. So I hope you found this interesting, folks. I hope it's given you a little bit more insight into the way communists are manipulating this country and all around the world, to be honest. So please share the show, like us, get the word out as much as you can. So thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon. God bless America and God bless all of you. Thank you.